In the history of religion, never has anyone outside of the Vatican's control ever owned privately a saint. I support any type of collection, but you'll hear a lot of collectors say things like, oh, I started with like raccoon bones or possum bones or something like that. And we all did, and if anyone were to say otherwise, it's not true. I think that's everyone's segue into the macabre because it's still safe and societally it's acceptable to do something like that, more so than bringing in the human skull. But there comes a point where that's no longer satisfying and curiosity takes over. You want to do more and you want to see more and you really want to pull back the curtain and see what's behind the curtain. At least that's how it was for me. I wanted to know what was behind the curtain. And that involved collecting things that were, I don't like to say the word questionable, but maybe not as acceptable as the raccoon bones or the possum skull or, maybe just the wreath arrangement or something. I needed more. Okay, how I learned about the St. Vitalis skull. This is great. I love talking about this. I don't get asked near enough. I, as most collectors do, spend a lot of time on the internet late at night when we're in our heads and just, you'll open one page and then you wind up on 100 pages and you don't even know where you started, but you wound up somewhere. I must have typed in saint or reliquary, or I knew very little about saints outside of the Vatican. And I came across this wonderful page. It didn't have a lot of information, but it had a photo, which was enough, of St. Vitalis. And I thought, this is just beautiful. And I really didn't know the history of the saint. I just thought this is really beautiful. And started researching it and realized that it was owned, but you didn't know by who. It was very obscure. I just knew it wasn't obtainable. And I thought to myself in that moment, and I remember it like it was yesterday, if something like that ever became available, I would love to have it. But that being said, when you're looking at something of that magnitude, you're also telling yourself in the same sentence, that's fantasy land and that is absolutely impossible. And it doesn't happen outside of the parameters of the Vatican. And it's never going to happen. So save the photos into your files so you can go back and look at them from time to time, because this is something that's never going to come to you. The person who was interested in selling the skull had made an announcement that they were interested in selling it. And I became very concerned very quickly about getting it because so many people became aware very quickly that it was available. And I thought to myself, once again, this is something that I'm not going to have, but I have to try. I have to try. The worst that could happen is I get a no. And so I made contact with the person who was selling the skull and expressed my interest and was met with a price tag that I just thought, we're done. But then there's that part of you that's a collector that says, there has to be a way. And it went from we're done to I've got to find a way to make this work. I want it so badly. I promised myself in a weird way, if it ever became obtainable, I would do everything in my power to get it because I loved it so much. So I reached out to the person who was selling it and they gave me the price tag and told me what they had needed. And the person who would rather remain anonymous is actually continuing to work on a book. And I did have merchandise that this person needed for the book, or I shouldn't say needed, but it would be helpful for the book if they had certain merchandise. So we kind of mixed a monetary and collection together to come up with an agreement. It had to feel right because it was such an important piece. It was beyond worrying about money and about the prestige of a collection. It was more about this has to feel right for the two people involved. I didn't want the other person to allow me to obtain the skull and ever feel bad about me having it. St. Vitalis is absolutely a saint of the people. For people who are listening to this who don't know the history of the saint, he is the saint of genital disorders, venereal diseases, bladder disorders. That's a people saint. When people hear St. Vitalis, that's someone they can relate to. St. Vitalis was originally from Umbria, in Italy. And along the way, the head was removed from the body, and the head was secured in Ireland, in Meath, Ireland. And from what I'm told, that was generational before the last generation of people decided that it wasn't something that they wanted anymore. And I don't know if this is historically accurate, but someone reached out to me from Italy and said that the body of St. Vitalis is in Italy. And what I feel is there was a point where they thought maybe because of the lifestyle that St. Vitalis had led, that cutting off the head separated the actions of the body from the saintliness of the head. That would be my explanation for why the two are not together. The saint is very valid to me on a spiritual level, but I don't think spirituality has to involve religion. Because that being said, if someone had a very personal experience with Saint Vitalis that was Muslim or Hindu, for whatever reason, if we were saying it's only a Catholic thing, we would be saying that their experience with him isn't valid. And their experience, if they had it, just in the fact that they had it, that makes it valid. If you look at St. Vitalis' skull, he does have markings on his skull that look like paintbrush strokes, but they're not paintbrush strokes. There was originally a veil that covered the head that became imposed with the actual skull throughout time. You can actually see the patterning of the mesh that originally went over the face, which really speaks volumes to the age of the saint. The reliquary box, to my knowledge, that he's been in, he's never been shifted out of that position. That is how he was put together or assembled when the reliquary box was made. At the end of the day, I always ask myself, have I successfully curated this piece? And the answer is yes.